the learning sea.
Make sure you subscribe the channel. It's free for you, but a motivation for us.
Once a duck and a drake were eagerly waiting for their eggs to hatch. Soon it was time to rejoice. The eggs finally hatched, and out came 5 little ducklings, one by one. But one of them was very different from the rest of them. "You are so different than the rest of us, but don't worry, you will be good when you grow up." But other ducks were not so kind and affectionate as the mama duck. All the other ducks and ducklings made fun of the young one.
Na 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 na. You are so ugly. You are not one of us. Look at you. You are so ugly.
Nobody wanted to play with the young duckling. He had no friends or family. He was all lonely and sad. He saw his reflection in the water and assumed,
"Perhaps I may be really ugly. I don't want to see my reflection ever again."
Tired of all the bullying and rejections, the ugly duckling left his home and walked into the woods. Tired and lonely, and when all hope was about to be lost, a kind woodcutter took pity on the ugly duckling and took him home. The woodcutter took good care of the ugly duckling. The ugly duckling was happy to find a cozy and warm home. The ugly duckling grew bigger and bigger day after day, with strong wings and legs. One day, it flew to a nearby pond and wandered around the edge of the pond. The ugly duckling saw a wedge of swans playing in the pond and admired them.
What beauty and grace!
The swans noticed the curious ugly duckling.
Hi, want to play with us?
The ugly duckling was quite surprised. It was long since anybody had been so kind to him.
What, me? I would love to. I like your beautiful wings. What are you called?
The swan burst into laughter and said,
Same as what they call you.
Me? You mean an ugly duckling?
Who called you ugly? You're a beautiful and handsome swan.
What? Me, a handsome swan?
The ugly duckling peeped down to see his reflection. Yes, he had grown into a beautiful and handsome swan, and he had never even been a duck at all.
What a fool I had been to believe others all these days!
Come join us. We would be glad to have you as our friend.
The ugly duckling was finally happy and free. He realized that he was just different than the rest of the ducks. SnowWhite and the 7 Dwarfs. Once upon a time, in a big castle, there lived a kind princess named SnowWhite. SnowWhite was not only the prettiest girl, but she was very kind and helpful too. All the animals and birds loved her. One day, her mother the queen passed away, and her father the king married again. Her stepmother was a mean and evil woman. The new queen was jealous of SnowWhite. She wanted to be the most beautiful and fairest of all. She asked her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror, tell me who is the fairest of all." The mirror replied, "Queen, I hear your call. Snow White is the fairest of all." The stepmother was furious and ordered her servants to take Snow White away to the woods and kill her once and for all. So the servants took Snow White for a ride in the woods.
Oh, I love to ride on a horse in the woods.
However, when they reached deep in the woods, the servants took pity on her, and instead of killing her, they told her about the evil plan hatched by her stepmother and left Snow White to her fate in the forest. Heartbroken, Snow White wandered for long and finally came across a small cottage.
Hello? Anyone at home?
The cottage belonged to the 7 dwarfs living in the woods. They had been away in search of food and fodder. Finding the house in a mess, Snow White cleaned and tidied the house and cooked a delicious meal for all. The 7 dwarfs were soon back home. They were grateful to Snow White for all the help. They shared their story, and Snow White shared her story.
It's all right. I have found a new home and new friends.
The dwarves and Snow White became good friends, and they played and sang together. Snow White was all happy with the 7 friendly dwarves. Meanwhile, overjoyed on getting rid of Snow White, her stepmother asked the mirror again, "Mirror, tell me who is the fairest of all." The mirror replied,
Queen, I hear your call. Snow White is still the fairest of all.
The queen was furious. So, Snow White is alive? She threatened her servants and learnt the truth. Deciding to finally get rid of Snow White herself, she took a few poisoned apples and headed to the woods, disguised as an old woman. On finding Snow White alone, "My little girl, here are some delicious apples just for you."
Thank you, kind lady. I love apples.
As soon as Snow White took a bite, she fainted and dropped to the ground as dead as the wood. Finally got rid of you, Snow White. My work is done. On finding Snow White dropped as dead, the dwarves were very sad and broken. They laid her to rest in a coffin and mourned around her. Just then, a handsome prince passing through the woods. Being curious, he dismounted from his horse to see the 7 dwarfs crying around the beautiful Snow White. The prince could not contain himself, and his eyes were filled with tears. As his tears rolled down, they fell on Snow White's cheek. The tears of her true love woke up Snow White from her deep slumber. To everyone's delight, the handsome prince, Snow White, and the 7 dwarfs lived happily together ever after. And the evil queen met her fate and was sent to the dungeons forever.